underway, being Valentine's Day, we'll try to get out of here on time, if not a little early.
Which ones did you have to read?
I forget where we left off.
I wrote read, where we left off, hang on.
I believe we are
Start of 6?
chapter, I believe chapter 6, we did, because we did the chapter 5 homework last week, right?
Yeah, because we talked about glow plugs and,
Jet drives, that's where we were. We actually didn't do the homework for 5.
I don't think we did either.
No, because I wrote down how many I got wrong.
Well, that just means we didn't get any more.
Yeah, maybe you just didn't get anything wrong then.
It's helping me
Maybe
judge
you
how
got
much I have to study.
Okay, yeah, no, we did not do
Use
5.
Jim's study techniques.
Yeah.
You'll be okay.
We'll start with the homework on 5. I guess.
Alright, the most common source of problems on a diesel engine is the fuel system, B.
Yep.
Two common problems associated with diesel fuel are water and bacterial growth, C.
3, fuel filters are necessary to prevent, D, foreign matter entering the system.
Diesel fuel systems must be bled to remove air from the fuel system, D.
Most marine diesel engines are installed with primary and secondary fuel filters to remove dirt and water from the fuel system.
What happens to the heat that a marine diesel engine produces while running? I put about 1/3 of the heat is transferred into useful work.
Yep.
Right?
It doesn't say much for the efficiency of a
No.
modern engine.
yeah. 7, a thermostat is used to maintain engine temperature by controlling the amount of water that passes through the engine block and cylinder heads, B.
The two basic types of marine cooling systems are direct and indirect, A.
The oil level in a diesel engine should be checked before every engine start, D.
10, engine oil viscosity can be dramatically affected by the ambient temperature.
Too much oil in the engine's oil pan will cause A, over revving.
When engine trouble occurs, the very first rule is to check the obvious, B.
The most common cause of cooling system problems is loss of water flow in the raw water circuit. C.
And 14, when low oil pressure is indicated, the best troubleshooting technique is to D, shut the engine down.
For the record, Jim, I got 100.
Draw
Just
my,
listen to him.
draw my,
And
draw my
also,
hat.
just a note on
Yeah, gotta have it.
question 11, they don't say it in here, but that applies to a diesel engine. Cause I don't, that one is a little vague for me,
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
but,
I had to search for it too.
yeah, cause like in a gasoline engine, that makes no sense whatsoever, and they didn't specify, in this chapter, it's fairly obvious because the chapter's on diesel engines, but if you see that question in the general exam, it doesn't really make sense. But, although I suppose you could narrow that down because none of the other 3 make much sense, so. Alright, now I remember, now did everybody do the homework on 6? That's why I got confused, cause last week we were gonna do 5, but then I pushed it off.
Yep.
Yes.
Did you want to do the homework on 6?
Yep.
The device which allows the engine RPM to match the load of the propeller is the D reduction gear.
I haven't gotten there yet, but, right.
Ready? Okay. If an engine with a reduction ratio of 2-to-1 is running at 2,000 RPMs, at what speed does the propeller turn? D, 1,000 RPMs.
3, one advantage of the jet drive system is C, it enhances shallow water operation.
Side thrusters are used to C, move the bow or stern either port or starboard.
To provide for reverse motion, the jet drive system uses D, reverse gate.
6, modern marine propellers have 3 distinct measurements. B, diameter, number of blades, and pitch of the blades.
7, as a general rule, the number of blades on a propeller increases, power and weight of a boat increases.
Propeller's design is always represented by 2 numbers. The first number always refers to diameter, B.
The diameter of a propeller is usually limited by the design of the boat, A.
The 2 factors that are commonly used to determine the optimum performance of a propeller for a specific boat are engine speed and propeller speed.
Does everybody else agree with that?
Oh,
I had a C.
Rob, did you have
I,
C?
I had C,
Oh,
C.
speed
Boat
and-
speed and
Boat
engine
and
speed.
Oh, it is
engine.
boat speed.
Yeah,
15.
because the engine and the propeller speed are always gonna be
yeah.
Linked together.
Like I
linked
said,
together.
that's what you wanna get at maximum throttle. You want your RPM to be in the manufacturer's recommended range.
Okay. A preliminary view of a propeller's overall performance can be had by observing the tachometer.
I thought that one was tricky.
Me too.
I was back and forth between C and D.
Well, cause the one before it says you have to look at boat speed and engine speed. So to me, that would be the speedometer and the tachometer.
Yeah, except they don't offer the two together.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, basically the tachometer is, the engine speed is your primary. You're also considering boat speed, but until you're really fine tuning,
yeah, cause
for
then
most purposes, what you're looking at is to hit rated RPM at wide open throttle. And so really engine speed is,
That one came up in determining propeller performance.
Yeah.
Last
Yeah.
paragraph.
So we're at 12, the usual cause of propeller cavitation is the propeller, C, blade dented or chipped.
The impeller used on the jet drive D operates inside an enclosed.
If a propeller's pitch is too high, the engine will, A, not be able to reach its maximum rated speed at wide open throttle.
so there's kind of a pattern there. All the propeller performance ones we're talking about engine speed.
right. I don't know if you're gonna get to it, but at some point, can you talk about what cavitation
Yep.
is? I didn't fully understand the way they described it.
That's actually, I think where we left off, that's coming up.
Okay.
But, actually, I'll mention it right now, cause I don't remember where that comes in, but, basically, propeller cavitation is when, when a propeller's operating, it's basically screwing its way through the water. The blades are pushing water. Cavitation is when air starts getting mixed in with that water. So now all of a sudden you don't have a solid,
A smooth
relatively
transfer of
solid
fluid.
surface. And cavitation can be caused by several things. One is, as it says in here, if you have a chipped or damaged prop, you'll get a lot of turbulence off the prop, and it'll actually start breaking the water into oxygen, hydrogen, and you end up getting air pockets or
Okay,
oxygen pockets. Other thing that'll do it is if the propeller is too close to the surface. This is more of an issue like on outboards. If you're putting different motors on different boats, it's normally determined by the manufacturer of the boat what the proper depth is.
yeah,
But I myself I've always, for years, I've mixed matched different motors on different boats. In fact, a transom on our little 14-foot, what we call free boat, I have cut that down and built it up and then cut it part way down, because as I've swapped different motors. And cavitation, basically, when all of a sudden you hear the engine RPM go way up and it's not driving the boat.
okay, okay.
Another
makes
thing that will
sense.
cause that is excessive propeller speed, which is one of the reasons we can't run a propeller at engine RPM, because it just starts, you think of your blender,
Yeah.
basically, that's, cavitation is what you see in a blender. It's,
Okay,
you're basically beating the water instead of efficiently
moving it
pushing through
or
it.
pushing through it, oh, okay. Because I had heard of pumps cavitating,
Yeah,
but I never understood
Yes.
how that, but it's the same principle.
it's the same, pump
it-
cavitation is normally,
air.
it's sucking air in
And
somehow.
it's, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And again, on a small outboard, excessively hard turns at speed, you can actually you can start pulling air with the propeller.
Does cavitation ruin the engine?
I'm gonna say it's not good for it.
Because when I had an
it's-
outboard on a 25-foot sailboat, if the waves, the outboard would come out,
Yeah.
on the swells.
Yeah.
But it was like constantly doing that with every
Yeah.
swell.
Well, again, if it's, if you're not running at full RPM, if it's not over revving the engine, it's probably not a big deal. I'm still not gonna say it's particularly good for it, but it's probably not that detrimental within reason.
Because there's like nothing you can do, like if you just got
Yeah.
a motor through and it's cavitating on every swell, it's like, what are you gonna do? You just gotta keep plowing through.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if it's ruining the engine.
Not within reason, because the other thing to bear in mind, that when you're cavitating, you're also not pulling water, probably not pulling cooling water either.
Right. Yeah.
But if it's just for a brief second.
Yeah.
I think the main thing there is, as long as you're not over revving the engine from being at full throttle when you're doing that.
For a long period of consistent time.
And that's how you can actually do yourself on a lot of times, particularly if you've got an outboard or if you've got a boat out. I do fairly regularly, because when I was down in Hummerock, I was always coming in at lower tide than I wanted to be. So, I got to personally know every rock and stone in the bottom of that river. So it was quite common. I'd come in and I'd pull my drive up and just go get on the platform with a file and clean off the little dings to smooth out and it would actually make a difference in both efficiency and
And any ding is gonna affect it?
to some degree, yes, but is it measurable? That depends on the size of the ding.
Okay.
Chip, put a chip, have you a little bit more chip out of the, a chip out of it would be.
Again, I mean, it's not good, but if you've got a chip, the best thing to do is to kind of round smooth the edges of the chip so that you're not, again, that's where you can create cavitation. If you've got a sharp, jagged edge, or particularly an edge that's bent up slightly, I found they can be dinged up a fair amount, and if you smooth all of the high spots out of them, they still work relatively well.
I liked where it said to check the props after every time you use the boat.
The props?
Yeah, yeah. I forget it was,
I remember seeing that.
yeah,
It does somewhere, cause
In the
you can't.
maintenance, yeah.
chapter 20, or paragraph 29.
Well, you could if you wanna go wet.
Mhm.
The props should be inspected after every use.
They don't want us to swim in our marina.
Propeller should be, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
We looked at them at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Yep, they're still there.
Alright,
I think that's meant for outboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't even see our propellers in the water in Boston Harbor.
Yeah.
alright, now, as you saw, they mentioned the homework, but, replacing the propeller, and in here they say replacing the outboard propeller, which I don't understand that, but replacing the propeller with a water jet pump enhances shallow water operation. I have a little issue with that too. And having worked at a marina, I've lost count of how many impellers we had to replace because people sucked up rocks. And again, down at Hummerock where I was, the sand spit was right at the end of the river. And this was back before they outlawed jet skis on the river there. But we used to constantly, they'd go out to the spit, pull up on the beach with their jet ski. You know, at the end of the day, or where they pull it off the beach, well, now the intake area is full of sand and rocks and gravel. They fire it up and take off, and if you're in shallow water, you gotta remember the amount of pressure that's coming out of the back of that jet to propel the vessel, there's an equal amount sucking up from underneath. And it will pull some pretty decent sized stones and small rocks. It'll pull them right up off the bottom, a foot below the, and when you put those through that impeller, it, you know, it chips them, it dings them all up. Well, those spin at much higher speeds because it's an impeller versus a propeller. And they're designed to run at high, they're smaller diameter so they can run them at higher speed. But the downside of that, if you've got a chip or a ding in it, it raises havoc with the flow, the water flow. And I can't tell you how many people, they go out for the day and they say, we don't understand it, it ran fine going out to the spit, and coming home it didn't have the power that it used to have.
Gee.
And it was from, because I used to tell everybody, when you pull them off the beach, you should bounce up and down on the back, flush everything out,
Yeah.
then get it out into a couple of feet of water before you start it. And a lot of those, the intake grates are fairly coarse. You can put a pretty good sized stone through those intake grates. And the quote high performance grates are even bigger openings. But that's just something to be aware of. And the other thing with the jet drive to be aware of, they do not tolerate weeds or grass. Because I have a jet boat and a jet ski up at our place in Maine, and late August we start getting grass. And toward the end of the season, the grass starts breaking the surface around the edges, and I generally put anything that's a jet drive away at that point because it just sucks the grass in there. And the only way you can get it out is to pull the thing out on a trailer and go in there and pull out all the wrapped up grass. So the jet drive isn't, you know, it's like anything else. It has its place. You know, safety wise, it's nice. One of the reasons I had the jet drive when my kids were young, I had a jet boat, a little 14-foot Bayliner that was a jet drive. And I was, you know, great, there's no propeller. You know, to me it was a marginally safer as far as the kids swimming and tubing and stuff like that around the boat. Although as I tried to teach my kids, the safety is the person at the controls, don't expect the vessel to be your safety. You know, the first step toward being safe is operating in a safe manner. And they also, they also mentioned the reverse gate for the jet drives. I don't know if they have improved, but I know the older ones are a joke. it's a mere suggestion of going in reverse. Usually you go more sideways than backwards, but, because basically all that reverse gate is, basically it's a soup bowl that they put, that hinges down behind the drive, so that the thrust hits it and it reverses the thrust. Like I said, my experience is, again, my little jet boat has it, and reverse, as I said, it's kind of a mere suggestion that you want to go backwards. And also as another point, saying we've replaced a bunch of those impellers, that's not an inexpensive thing to do, because you have to completely disassemble. It's not like a propeller where you just take a nut off and change it. Because it's internal, you have to disassemble the jet drive to change that impeller. Alright, side thrusters. Do you have thrusters on yours?
Unfortunately, no.
No. Basically, side thrusters are pretty much a propeller mounted in a tube that goes across your hull. So you can get it, it's not as strong as a jet drive, but it's the same idea. You just you direct a column of water to push either the bow or the stern left or right. They're generally in larger craft. It's certainly a nice thing to have.
You can be the bow, if you have them on the bow and the stern, you can use both, right?
Yeah.
I learned the hard way, they don't work very well if you're moving forward too
Forward?
quickly.
Yeah, no, you're basically very low speed.
They don't work in winds, they don't work in current.
Primarily for docking.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they are for.
Yeah, I laughed at the suggestion in the book about using trolling motors as side thrusters.
Yeah, but that's a lame idea, isn't it?
I thought about it, I was like, we need really
I mean,
long.
and obviously, you
I
could
just
also
wondered-
use.
Would have to get like a 10 horsepower outboard.
I just went and bought
team.
two, it's not gonna work.
Cut it about faster.
And then obviously, if you have twin engines, you can also use
Yeah.
left and right engines, forward and reverse.
So that Volvo Penta drive, does that unit that sits below swivel 360 degrees? Is that how it steers?
Yeah, it's swivel. I don't know if it goes 360 degrees,
Oh, okay, but it swivels and
but
that's how
it
it steers.
swivels. You're talking about the IPS
Yeah.
drive.
Yeah,
Which
Yeah.
side to side?
What's that?
Each side to side.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
at least 180 could be. I think that's how they can actually walk the boat sideways.
Yeah.
Okay, but it doesn't go all the way around, okay.
I don't know.
I don't know, but I don't think so, but I don't honestly know. To me, that's an interesting idea, but there's a couple of things. One thing I don't like is something like that. There's no forgiveness. If you hit something, you run aground. If you're lucky, it's going to be horribly expensive.
Right.
If you're not lucky, I mean, I believe they are designed with a shear point, so that if you really clobber something, they'll shear off without sinking the boat, in theory.
Which in and of itself is problematic.
But I also question if they're as great as they first seemed like they were gonna be, why are they not more popular? Because they've been around for a long, I mean, this book is fairly old. This print was a reprint of the same course, hasn't changed.
Yeah.
If they're all that great, I would think they'd be a lot more popular than.
Yeah.
Well, I think modern tubs are using what they call pod now underneath. Which
Yeah.
is very similar in design.
Yeah.
That does 360, the pods.
I would imagine though that if you got that thing off to the side and then you hit reverse and you don't know where that thing is, or, you know, that type of thing, it seems like it's
Yeah.
like countering.
Well, I would hope they have a rudder indicator,
Yeah,
you know, rudder position or drive position. I found even on my stern drive that was a blessing. I just put I went to West Marine and just bought a stick-on thing that went in the middle of your steering wheel that showed, but it worked awesome. I had it for years. Because that is true, when without that, with a stern drive, you can go stick your head over the transom and see where the drive's at. But that is something that's nice to know where it is, especially if you're maneuvering in close quarters, to know which way the boat's gonna go when you put it in gear.
Yeah, we run into that with ours sometimes. We're not sure where the rudders are.
Isn't there another, steering system that doesn't face forward like that, but instead of having just the shaft, the propeller shaft go out the back, it comes out and goes down? And then the drive is, so like there's a vertical part.
Other than a stern drive,
Stern drive.
regular IO is like
Is
that.
that covered in here?
Not in this section.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
The next section.
that's a real inboard outboard, those have been around forever, which to me is, I happen to like just a traditional stern drive, as it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can have a fuel efficient, 4-cycle,
It's like an old.
quiet automotive engine, but you have the maneuverability, and what was important to me is the ability to pull up on the beach, because I could raise the outdrive.
right.
I found to be the best of both worlds, because I went from always having outboards, so when I got my first stern drive, I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, until I had to fix it. The problem with stern drives is there's a lot of complexity there, so maintenance and repairs, that tends to be a little more involved. Obviously, maintenance and repairs, the traditional straight inboard is the simplest.
Yeah, so it's like the inboard outboard, but like in this, you see the stern drive outside the boat. I'm
Yeah.
talking like below the water line on a sailboat. So you know how like you don't see the prop?
Oh,
On a
okay, you're
sail-
talking,
like the whole
I know
thing
what you're
is-
talking, I've seen
There are
those.
sail drives.
It's
Sail
sail
drive,
drives,
yeah.
yeah.
Straight down.
Yeah, so it's
So
just a
it's kind of the
sailboat.
same
that-
concept, but
It's
it's,
really an outboard that's inboard.
Yeah,
right.
Something like that, yeah.
It's
yeah,
a-
that's
You
a
steer-
good
you steer with
explanation.
your rudder, so that there's no steering on it, it's just driving the boat.
It's just propulsion.
Right,
Yeah,
You need the
Yeah.
boat's rudder to.
but the drive shaft isn't,
No,
I mean, not the propeller shaft's not.
Yeah.
It does.
It's
Yeah.
vertical.
basically you think, it's, as he put it, it's an outboard, but it's mounted in the
They
boat.
built it to the
Correct,
bottom
yeah.
part of the boat.
And the other one that never really
Sail
worked
drive.
out was,
Sail drive, yeah.
Sail drive, that's a.
Penyan had a tunnel drive for a while. And this is back late 60s into the 70s. That the idea was they cut a tunnel in the underside of the boat and pulled the prop up so that you could operate in shallower water. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out that well. Power was limited because of cavitation, because now you got the prop up closer to the water line. I saw a lot of old Penyans that had been converted to outboard. They had put transom brackets and outboards on them. Because Penyan made an excellent boat, but that whole tunnel drive thing just didn't really take off. Alright, one thing One thing to be aware of if you're operating around particularly larger vessels that may have side thrusters is, you know, like being behind a jet boat, there's a substantial amount of pressure that can, you know, if you happen to be going by next to that boat and they kick on the side thruster, you can suddenly find yourself going in a different direction, particularly if you're in a small boat. And as far as we talk about routine maintenance, you know, the routine maintenance is largely, a lot of it's going to be determined by your particular vessel. Again, and refer to the owner's manual. And I've mentioned this before, that anytime I purchase or acquire a new to me boat, if it doesn't come with all the manual, service manual, owner's manual, I will usually see if I can I'll order them. And even if it's something old, I'll get on eBay. And quite frankly, even as an owner, even a service manual, they're not cheap, but I would strongly recommend, if you own a boat, to get the full set of manuals for it, including, you know, the engine complete service manual. And granted, it's many hundreds of dollars, but oftentimes, you can go through, you know, when you take it to your mechanic, he's, oh, you need this and this done, you know, okay, you can look and see what he's talking about. And secondly, I find a lot of independent marine mechanics don't have the factory manuals. They'll have, you know, an aftermarket manual that covers 14 different versions. And, you know, they may appreciate it if you can give them, if you give them access to. And if it's someone like me, a printed manual is a goldmine for me. You know, I hate doing this, trying to find information on the computer.
Oh, yeah.
Give me a paper manual. I can sticky note, you know, put a sticky note on it and walk it out and lay it on top of the engine I'm working on.
Yeah. On the section about the routine maintenance, I guess I understand what they were saying about the stuffing box,
Yeah,
but like in our boat, because we have a V drive,
yeah,
the stuffing box is under the engine.
yeah.
So like there's no way of checking if you're having water coming in through the stuffing box after you launch the boat.
Unless it's pouring.
Well,
Yeah,
other than,
yeah, unless it's like really coming in.
well, this gets to another point that I strongly recommend is a monitor on your bilge pumps. And meaning that, and this, they're not that expensive, but it's a lot of times it's interconnected with your control panel, but it will monitor. So when you leave your boat for the weekend, you come back 4 or 5 days later, you can look at that and it'll tell you how many times your bilge pump came on during your absence.
So it's known as a cycle counter?
Yeah.
On my boat last season.
Cycle counter?
Cycle.
Yeah.
How
You
often
can
does
do
the
it
bilge
with an hour
pump
meter
cycle
too.
turn on?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and you can get them that basically just count the number of times it comes on. You can also get them that keep track of how long they were on. At a minimum, I just recommend getting something that lets you know when you come down the boat, hey, why it hasn't rained? Why has my bilge pump been on 5 times
Or 10 times or 20 times.
or whatever? Which gets to
Yeah, we had a neighbor like that at the marina. His bilge pump was coming on like every 45 seconds.
yeah. Unfortunately, the batteries only take that for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. So does that have to attach to the pump itself, or is it just
No,
in,
it's-
in line with the wiring?
Yeah, it's generally in with the wiring.
So it
but
just
it
keeps
does
track
need
of how
to-
many times
It
it's-
will have to be spliced into the wiring
Right.
that for the float switch itself as
Right.
well. You know, it's,
Okay.
but it's just, to me, that's just one of the things I wanna know if,
Hmm.
if my bilge pump is kicking on,
Okay.
especially if you're on a mooring where you're not hooked to shore power.
Mm.
But even aside from, even if you are, if you have a major leak, you may overwhelm the pumps at some point.
Okay. Yeah, because our bilge pumps are a nightmare to get to as well, so I didn't
Yeah.
know, like, are you connecting it down?
But I assume
In-
you can't see, you can't even get in with a mirror or anything to see the stuffing boxes,
With the mirror, might be able to,
just to see
yeah,
if you're getting,
yeah,
you're not necessarily gonna be able to count the number of drips, but if
Yeah.
you see any
Water
appreciable amount of
accumulating.
water there,
Yeah.
then something's not right.
yeah.
Jill can just hold on to your ankles as you're down there and,
I don't,
You going to the gym?
I don't fit.
I could.
We get like 8 inches between our
know.
2 engines.
I know.
When they get hot.
Why are some power boats, I think it's limited power boats, when I walk the docks, they're like spitting water constantly.
Air conditioning usually.
Air conditioning.
When no one's on the boat, they're just running the air
A
conditioning.
lot of people run,
Oh, yeah, all the
a
time.
lot of people leave it
Yeah.
running all the time.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
And that's
Yeah.
crazy, indoor refrigeration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's like a
Yeah.
garden
Same-
hose.
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
level.
That's air conditioning.
Yeah.
We run our air
Real waste of
conditioner
electricity.
as a dehumidifier, so it doesn't cool the air.
Yeah.
But it dries it out, yeah, and it keeps the,
So you can put it on dehumidify function.
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, and it'll have a constant stream of water, because the water's cooling the motor.
And yeah, as far as maintenance,
That's not our motor, but, yeah, we can find it.
I usually recommend doing, in the fall, when you're in the fall, doing all your fluid, changing all your fluids. For 2 reasons. One is you wanna get, particularly engine oil, transmission oil, you're gonna, engine oil particularly, you're going to get moisture, you're gonna get contamination, even on a perfectly healthy engine. Condensation, there's always some degree of blow-by past the piston rings, hence that's why we change oil periodically. But you wanna get that out of there before it sits over the winter, because those can be moisture as well as the byproducts of combustion can be corrosive. So I strongly recommend doing your service in the fall. And the other thing is, if you find any surprises, you'd rather know about it in the fall where you got all winter to deal with it. And by surprises, I'm talking about if you have a stern drive or an outboard, you find the lower unit full of water. You gotta drain the fluid, it comes out like a milky color. You gotta do seals in the lower unit. You wanna know that, you probably wanna know that in the fall, not a week before you're ready to launch,
I don't think it said in the book, how often should you change the transmission fluid in like an inboard or a V-drive? Is that like every season with the oil, or?
For that, I would, again, I said this, I would
Read
refer
the
to the
manufacturer.
manual.
Okay.
I think it depends on the drive, the lubrication they're using. Honestly, a V drive or just a reduction, gear reduction box, they're generally contained within the hull, so they're not really likely to get seawater in them. So you may find, if you don't use the boat a lot, you may not need to do it every season. Again, I would refer to the owner's manual as to what they recommend. And the other thing is, you've started doing an oil analysis is not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Basically, so you get a baseline to what's normal. Because I know a lot of these big commercial outfits, whether it be trucking companies or fishing fleets, they change their oil based on oil analysis. They don't do it by hours or months.
Yeah.
They'll pull a sample and send it out, and they'll get a report back. You're good for another 30% or 40%. Particularly like over the road trucking companies, it's not uncommon for them to go 40, 50,000 miles between oil changes. But they're having the oil analyzed every 10,000.
Yeah, it's cheaper than changing it.
And yeah, especially because some of these big diesels are 15, 18 gallons of oil to do an oil change.
If anyone hasn't seen one of those oil analysis, I brought them for Rusty to look at them.
Yeah,
Happy to pass them around.
that'd be good.
Yeah.
Alright, is any other questions or comments on chapter 6? Fairly clear as mud, as they say. Alright, then we will move on to outboard engines and stern drives. First thing you're gonna want to remember, outboard engines have 3 major units or sub-assemblies: the power head, the intermediate housing, and the lower unit. Remember that. Because you'll be shocked at how they can convolute such a simple sounding question on the exam. And generally, when I said lower unit, right? Generally, the intermediate housing also has a means for attaching the outboard to the transom of the boat. The lower unit, obviously, it's a part that operates underwater. And they're saying in larger engines, most engines, the lower unit houses the transmission to give you forward, neutral, and reverse.
In which part is it, sorry? In the lower?
In the lower unit. And this is of outboards and stern
Yeah.
drives.
Is the middle part just basically like a drive shaft?
Yeah, basically the middle part, well, it's a drive shaft, and that's also what
And the
holds
mountain.
it to the boat.
Okay.
That lower unit is full of oil, isn't it?
Yes, it is, hopefully.
But how often should that be replaced?
At least once a season. That's
Well,
generally
read
fairly
your
simple on an outboard.
Yeah, I know, I thought you were gonna say read the manual.
Or, in the case of the one I have, that oil gets changed every single time I use the boat because the seals are junk and it's full of water after one day. So, and I've been doing that for like 5 years. This winter, I actually finally brought the boat home from Maine and pulled the lower unit to change the seals in it.
Is that a difficult thing to do?
Well, again, it depends on what it's what engine it's on. Outboards generally aren't too difficult if they're not corroded if they're not corroded together.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I was discussing this with somebody here at the beginning, they're, on some of these saltwater outboards that are older, it can become next to impossible to get them apart. If it's not all rusted together, it took me, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes to do the seals in mine. That's complete, to take it apart, change the seals, put it back together. But mine's older, but it's been a freshwater motor all its life, so everything I was kind of shocked at how easily everything came apart. Because we still don't know if it's gonna work after I put it back together, but in theory it should. And outboard engines have now become popular, both 2-cycle and 4-cycle. From the beginning of the course, a 2-stroke versus a 4-stroke. And for years, the 4-stroke was a real oddball. When I was growing up, I think Homelight made a Bearcat 55 was a 4-stroke outboard. I honestly can't remember, that's about the only 4-stroke outboard I ever heard of when I was a kid. And that was, I think, a Renault motor or something that they used. They weren't particularly known for reliability. But nowadays, the 4-strokes have become very common in outboards. And partially it's because 4-stroke engines have become lighter and they're getting more power. The power to weight ratio has improved drastically since the 60s and 70s that I was talking about.
I'm amazed at the size of some of the outboards now. Even just the physical size.
But as far as being big,
Yeah.
yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And that there are like 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing you will,
I call that pure testosterone.
yeah. One thing I have noticed with these outboards, and this particularly the 2-stroke outboards, that they will use, like for years, OMC or Mercury, they would use the same engine, the block, pistons, the basic engine would be the same engine from, say, a 40 to 60 horsepower. And they would just use different carburation, different timing, but they'd use the same basic power head. And I learned this when I was working in Marina. We replaced the power heads on a couple of V4, I don't know what they were, maybe 115s or 125, Evinrude's or Johnson, I don't remember which. And we went to get reman power heads, and the listings for the power heads were from like 95 horse to like 135 or something. I was like, well, which is it? And I was quite shocked to find out it's the same engine, but which comes to, so if you're buying a 90 horse, that's one big motor for a 90 horse, because it's still the same engine that's in the bigger ones. I don't know if that's as common now, but it used to be very common to.
Suppose you have the mechanical know-how, if you had a 90 engine like you just said, could you soup it up to what a bigger version if you knew?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically if you got a blown up 135 and you took the carburetors and ignition system and swapped everything out, exactly what you'd have to swap, I don't know. You'd have to get into the parts books and figure out. But yeah, you could do that. Which have done plenty of that kind of stuff over the years. And sometimes it's worked out, other times it's failed horribly. So. I mean, I'm actually right now in the middle of marrying a couple of snowmobiles to, I have one that blew up that everybody liked that had reverse, and I have another one that ran great, but no one wanted it because it didn't have reverse. They're two different ones, a 90s vintage, the other is like a 2005.
So you make it like a Frankenstein.
And yeah, so I'm basically trying to take the transmission out of the 2005 and make it fit a different model from the 90s. And then I actually got it to work. The big test is going to be this weekend when we take it up north and see how far it goes before it blows up.
You taking a buddy with another
One that works.
snowmobile with you?
Oh yeah, we always go out together, because like everything else I own, I don't know. Well, the only snowmobile I have that the model year starts with a 2 is the one that blew up. So everything else is 20 some odd years old, and it's another one. As far as my kids know, part of the sport of snowmobiling is getting towed home. That's a normal event with us.
Vintage, you're vintage.
And but you know what? We have just as much fun as the people that go out and spend $25,000 to buy a.
Snow walker.
And I had to laugh because we had some friends up to camp one weekend, and the kids took off snowmobiling, and you know they came back. We're all sitting down to dinner. They were gone a good part of the day, and at dinner time, my son says, "Dad, you're gonna have to take a look at the Arctic Cat. It died." And our friends that were visiting, that were up with us, well, where is it? And Howard's like, oh, it's in the garage. And he's like, well, how'd you get it home? You know, he was like, because my kids were young at the time. My son was probably 12 or 14. And he said, oh, we towed it home. You know, there's a tow rope in every sled. You know, and the kids are so used to that, they thought nothing of it. Well, these friends of ours are like, how did he even know to tow it? And I was kind of chuckling. I said, that's just part of every time we go out. Something goes wrong. It's inevitable.
You taught them to be resourceful.
It's the first thing to learn.
Yeah.
Disaster and recovery.
So you can drag them behind? Is that how?
Yeah, you take the belt off,
Oh, you take the belt off.
and then the track will just roll, and you can tow them.
Okay.
But they were just shocked that
Just
they,
taking the belt
I don't
off is
like
a big deal for me.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
how tough is
How
that?
the heck do you do that?
It's actually not. You don't need any tools. It's in the owner's manual because that's.
See that? We walked right into it.
Which you have on your cell phone, right? Yeah.
RTFM.
Yeah.
But the point was these friends of ours were shocked because the kids didn't even call. There was nobody was out. It was
You
like
just did it.
it was just whatever. It was just mentioning over dinner that one of the sleds died.
Mm.
And don't get me wrong, there are times that I get kind of sick of that routine, but
We shall see.
Especially when it's cold.
yeah. Well, this is another one of those. I got the machine that I'm fixing for nothing because nobody really wanted it, and it figures the one that blew up I actually bought from a dealer and paid good money for, and it's blown up twice. So the second time I decided I'm done with it.
Right.
Is there plenty of snow up north right now?
It's supposed to get some warm weather, but only a day or so. I mean, it's not great, but it's decent.
How far north do you go?
Just central Maine.
Okay.
It's about 5 hours up. We were up there 2 weekends ago, and it was 22 below zero when I got up in the morning.
Yeah.
All right.
That's when you don't want to have to take care of it, when it breaks.
Yeah. Well, I went out to get my tractor going to move some snow, and I had a block heater, so I figured, it should fire even though it was cold. It was in the barn, and I had a heater under it. What I didn't count on is, the engine was warmed up with the block heater, but the battery wasn't too happy about 22 below zero. And after about 5 minutes out there, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to bother because this is just a tractor. There's no heated cab, no cab or anything. It's like, even if I get this started, I'm gonna last about 5 minutes out here.
If that, yeah.
So I said, you know what, we'll come back in another week and I'll do the snow then.
Just find an old snow cap that no one wants.
But, well, I have a neighbor that plows the dooryard for us so we can get in and out. But it builds up, so when I'm up there, I take the tractor and push everything back so we can. Because we have a really miserable driveway going in. It's a pretty good downhill grade toward the lake. And we're on a private road off the beaten path. We're kind of out in the willy wag. So when he gets stuck, there's nobody around to pull him out. So I'm just afraid one of these days he's going to be like, it's just not worth it anymore. And he's charging me the astronomical price of $10 a storm to plow my driveway.
Well, how do you do it?
I hope you have that in writing.
Oh, I told him when he told me that's what he wanted, I was like, you're joking, right? And he's like, no, that's what I want. I was like, I run a snowplowing business. For less than $30, I'm not even gonna show up in your property, let alone drop a plow. And to him, it's like, look, he plows the road anyway, and he's like, to me, it's beer money.
Right.
So I usually throw him what he asked for plus a couple $100 every spring.
Right.
But it's a different, people are a lot different up there. Anyway, back to the outboard. The 4-stroke outboards are similar, if not again like their inboard counterparts, adapted automotive engines. Although for an outboard they generally are modified considerably more because they have to be designed to run standing on end instead of on a horizontal plane. But I know the Honda outboards it's a version of one of their automotive engines in some of their outboards.
So for like the biggest of the outboards nowadays, think of like Mercury's got the Verado 400, the Verado 600. Like, what are they using for a block for those that they're getting 600 horsepower out of? I mean, you don't
I'm
get 600
assuming
horse out of
that's-
an inboard.
Yeah, huh?
Because I mean, there's no like off the shelf
Yeah,
motor.
no, when you start getting into
that
those-
you get 600
Those
horsepower.
big outboards,
Yeah.
those are made, I mean, Mercury Marine actually makes a lot of their own
Okay.
castings. In fact, Mercury Marine has been involved with some of the high performance versions of automotive for some of the automobile manufacturers. Mercury Marine, I believe, was involved in the Corvette ZR1 high performance motors.
Okay.
Just as, because Mercury has had a relationship with General Motors because they were buying the GM engines. Well, it went both ways. Mercury also did a lot of I mean, Mercury Marine is a much smaller entity than General Motors, and they have the ability to custom build and
Okay.
they can do the engineering and the research and development that a company like GM is never going to be able to do. And so but the point being, Mercury Marine does do a lot. I suspect they make their own blocks.
Their own product development. Oh, okay.
As like the 2-stroke outboards are all, they're all made by or for their manufacturers.
Okay. So they're not taking like an LS block and getting 600
No,
horsepower.
not on an outboard.
Oh, okay.
Because the other thing, on the automotive engine and the inboards, one of the, they're generally cast iron engines just because of the environment they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you really can't put, 600-700 pounds of small block Chevy and stand it on an outboard. But also is that the block has to be, and it points in here, it has to be designed to run in a vertical
Mhm.
orientation. And yeah, and as far as outboard engines, I know we covered this when we were talking about engines, but they have the specially designed ports in the sides of the cylinder to allow the fuel and air in and the exhaust out.
Is trim on large power boats always at the engine, or are those like the trim tabs?
Now,
One of those things that you see in
yeah, trim tabs are
Different. Just trimming the engine.
on a stern drive or an outboard. You can trim the
Right.
engine up and down, or the drive.
Yeah.
On an inboard, like their boat, you can't. So
Okay.
you're strictly relying on
We have
tabs.
Those like
trim
metal plates you
tabs.
see?
Yeah.
The metal plate, so the trim, the trim is going up from the boat. The trim tabs are, especially with us engine thrust, it wants to move the boat, or even just the way I drive, I'm 160, I've got 2 people on the boat. Our boat is, I'm in this side, passengers tend to be here, so we go sideways. So the trim tabs bring the boat back to plane, so it brings
So
it
you,
back to life.
do you pretty much constantly adjust them if you're paying
Always.
attention?
Yeah. So yeah, so and then if people move around, so if I've got a 200-pound guy on this side, he goes to this side, then
Right.
the boat won't move,
And
so
all of a
that
sudden.
We could do.
you go the other way, so that,
We could do them individually, but our boat's 13,000 pounds, so it doesn't matter what side of the boat I sit on. It's still, it's gonna ride level. So we tend to just trim both tabs at the same time.
And
Yeah.
does it,
Jeff,
does it
is that
move?
where you've got a relatively narrow beam?
Mhm.
Does that make a difference?
it does.
Yeah.
On our boat, yeah, so
Well, yeah.
you're probably 11 feet or more.
Like 12 and a half.
And do those tabs move all directions?
No, they,
It just up,
mine
down.
is just up and down,
They're-
basically, so it's,
They're hinged to the
Forward
transom.
and
To the
back,
transom.
forward and back.
and it's more, so you
Up and
could,
down.
so one would stay flat, so if and they're opposite. So if I'm leaning this way, I'm gonna push this one down to create friction to bring this side up.
Yeah.
I'll pass this around. This is actually a 4-horse Johnson outboard power head. Just so you can see the ports they're talking about in the cylinder. And you can also see, if you remember, we had talked about how the 2-stroke engine, the incoming fuel pushes the spent exhaust gases out, the fuel and air pushes us. And you can see the shape of the piston, the top of the piston is designed so that as the incoming charge comes in, there's kind of an odd shape to the top of the piston that makes it swirl to push the exhaust out. But mainly, it's like I said, you can see the ports they're talking about. And, just reiterating that
So is this just the exhaust?
that's
port
the
here?
exhaust port you're looking
Okay,
at.
Alright.
If you recall, the intake goes in through the bottom, at the bottom of the cylinder there,
Yeah.
into the crankcase, and then it's pushed up through the transfer ports on the, if you look in the top of the piston that's down, you can see the ports on the other side where the fuel and air come in.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
And again, I mentioned
but there's no head.
piston rings, which are basically what effectively seal the space between the piston and the cylinder. And also, you know, this piston is a good example of what happens if you keep going after your overheat light comes on. That's what happened to this motor. It got badly overheated, and you can see the
Oh, this
aluminum,
making-
yeah, it actually started to melt. Basically, it got so hot, the oil film broke down, so the aluminum started actually touching the cast iron cylinder.
Which is why it's now a prop in a class.
Yes.
So that's figure 61 that you're showing us. I think it's right by your left finger, that one.
Yeah, that would be the one on the right. The left one is a two-stroke piston, which is, if you look at the pistons in that engine that is passing around, you'll see they look like the other one.
Yeah.
Cause that engine, that piston there is out of a four-stroke cycle.
So you say which one is a two-stroke in this?
The two-stroke is the one, in the pictures, the one
that's
on
in the
the,
engine.
yeah, the one on the left, that's got that funny shape to the top, like those. That's a four-stroke piston that he has, cause that's just got a flat top.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Now, the rings on a two-stroke, you won't have that oil control ring on the
No,
two-stroke.
you will not.
And then the rings can't move, right?
Yeah, they
They're not-
have,
They
and I,
don't float.
yeah, I don't have a two-stroke piston, but basically in that groove that the ring's in, there'll be a little pin so
It
that
locks it in.
it locks so that the rings can't turn.
Is that the slotted skirt thing? What's the slotted skirt?
Where are you?
See it right there on the diagram?
Right hand side
Oh.
bottom.
Just has to go down so I can see.
That slotted skirt is just a design feature. I mean, I actually haven't, I've only seen it in this book. I haven't actually seen it in anything I've taken apart.
Doesn't exist in real life.
Take quotes on the other side.
Like a widget.
Can I see it inside?
Actually overheated the engine.
Yeah, two-stroke engines will usually only have
Quotes on one side.
two, and actually some of the modern ones only have one piston ring.
It's coming through here.
I don't know.
Because you're really not, you know, you're not dealing with the oil control issues. Although, on a side note, I was actually, I still haven't, I actually gotta look into it, just yesterday where I work at the school at Babson. They brought in one of the grounds guys brought in a brand new backpack leaf blower that wasn't running right. He asked if I could take a look at it. Yeah, I'll take a look at it, and I mean, those are generally small two-stroke engines. So I'm running, he's right, it doesn't run right, but normally I can, right off the, as soon as I run it, I can tell you what's going on. Usually the carburetors are gummed up, and I can just tell by the feel what's happening. It's like, this one's weird, I can't put my finger on what's going on. Now, so I start taking it apart, and I pull the, pull the shrouds and stuff off, and I find valves in there, like poppet valves, like the four-stroke engines, like in this. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm looking at it, it's a true two-stroke engine, the fuel and oil's going into the crankcase, and it has valves. I'm in a complete, and I'm just this just happened, I actually have got to do some research, and this is some sort of a hybrid, I'm guessing it must be for emissions. This is a brand new machine, it's one of these new, more environmentally friendly, they're quieter. But it's like a two-stroke engine with valves, I guess. Or either that, or it's a four-stroke engine that you're mixing the fuel and oil to lubricate it, because it does not have a crankcase or an oil sump. I know it has nothing to do with the class, but I found it very interesting, because
That's fascinating.
it basically breaks all the rules that I've been taught.
Yeah. What brand is it? The blower?
A steel, I think.
Hmm.
Because they have, those are the things that have come under fire lately, the the
Yeah.
leaf blowers now. A lot of the cities and towns are outlawing them
Because of the sound, because of the noise.
because of the noise.
Yeah.
So they're now making quieter ones, which work half as well, but,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say the power. Maybe
Actually,
the
but,
power.
Yeah, actually, the backpack ones aren't as bad as the handheld gas ones, because we have both. The handheld one screams.
Yeah.
It's such
The-
a small motor, I mean,
You gotta wear air protection, yeah.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Unfortunately, the problem with that is the biggest noise from those blowers isn't the motor. It's you're moving a
The
huge
fans.
volume of
Yeah,
air.
it's the impeller.
So the
The
quieter
fan.
ones don't work. And this is what we found at Babson. They bought a bunch of the modern ones,
Yeah.
that the ones that are approved by like the city of Newton, but they don't work that well because they're not loud because they don't move that much air. But I'd love to see some of these bureaucrats that are making these regulations. Let them start doing their own lawns instead of
Yeah.
having a lawn service come and see what they think of this.
It's okay for them to use a high-powered leaf blowers on their home,
Yeah.
but not.
Well, actually, at this point now, most of the towns, it's commercial landscape, it's commercial companies that can't use you can still, it's like, we can still use the loud ones at Babson on our own property.
Mm.
And, cause when I first heard that, when they were telling, I didn't believe, I thought someone was pulling my leg when they first told me that cities were outlawing these things. I said, you gotta be kidding. And, here I'm the one that I was telling you last week, I built an 18-horse V-twin leaf blower.
Yeah, show up with that.
They
in the
can hear
town
2
hall.
towns away.
Yeah, show that in town hall.
However, they only have to listen to it for about 15 minutes and my
Right.
whole yard's done.
Right.
Gone with the wind.
Sounds like an F-16.
That's what I used.
Yeah. It's funny, is it really does. It sounds like a 747 taking off in the front yard.
Or blow a balloon out of the sky.
Haven't paid a cent, haven't picked up a rake.
It's a handy thing to be able to do nowadays, I understand.
They missed, they missed.
Well, they got
They
it
missed?
second try.
Yeah, they
Feel bad if
They
they
still
don't
haven't figured out what these other things are, right? They must be aliens, right?
That would be your next job as a drone pilot.
And basically, they talk a little bit here at figure 62 about the cylinder head. If you pass that, or that's the cylinder head off of that engine. And you can see it's kind of an odd shape. And again, the shape is also, they're trying to, as efficiently as possible, push out the spent exhaust without losing too much of the incoming air charge.
So is that all aluminum?
Yes, the crankshaft is steel, and the connecting rods are steel, but the block is aluminum, and I believe this has steel liners in it.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it does, there's steel sleeves in the, I forgot what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, because the biggest problem that they've had for years with two-strokes is, it's great that they're combining two events, two strokes or two cycles or two events in each piston stroke. Because remember, we talked about how the two-stroke engine still has the same 4 events: the intake, compression, power, and exhaust. But it does it in 2 strokes of the piston instead of 4 strokes of the piston in a 4-cycle engine. Unfortunately, the problem they have is because they're doing them simultaneously, the incoming air, instead of using an extra piston stroke to push the exhaust out, they're using the incoming fuel and air to push the exhaust out. So inevitably, a certain amount of that new fuel and air is going to get out a little bit of that's going to get out with the exhaust, which is why they're a nightmare for emissions. But the upside of the two strokes is you get a power stroke every single time the piston every time the piston hits the top, you're getting a power stroke. Whereas on a 4-cycle engine, you only get it every other time. Hence the reason that traditionally 2-strokes have been so much more powerful for their size. Although they are, again, technology is starting to address this. They're starting to be able, with controlled fuel injection, what the injection systems are doing now is the incoming charge coming into the cylinder is just air, and almost like a diesel, it doesn't inject the fuel till the last second after the port is already closed for the exhaust. So it curbs a lot of that excessive hydrocarbons or unburned fuel coming out the exhaust. And that was the kind of the idea between like the Mercury Optimax and I forgot the name of the Evinrude had one that had some teething issues, but
So with
I think you're
two-strokes-
going to start seeing 2-strokes they've kind of been getting away from them, and I think you're going to start seeing some resurgence of the 2-strokes as the technology enables us to clean them up.
Mhm.
And I suspect this leaf blower thing I was just talking about may be a step in that direction. I think it's kind of a hybrid of a 2 versus 4-stroke engine.
So what creates the sheen on a 2-stroke? Is it the oil that wasn't thoroughly burned,
The
or is it
sheen?
like whenever you started 2-stroke? I had one. It was always oil was always behind the boat. It was like you'd always get that blue film.
Oh, that's
Or is
that's
that-
unburned.
is-
That's unburned because your lubricating oil is mixed with your fuel.
So you would.
So any unburned fuel that comes out is going to have a little bit of oil in it. You know, that's assuming that you haven't got bad lower unit seals or something like that. But
The engine's gone, but I always just wondered because it's like whenever you'd fire it up, it would just create this blue.
yeah. I mean, if either that was an older motor
It wasn't
or it wasn't running right, because even the modern 2-strokes, you shouldn't really be seeing that.
That's what it's called.
Alright, and I talked a little about this before, but figure 63, they show a very basic carburetor. I used to get fairly heavily into carburetors, but quite frankly, they're kind of dinosaurs now. There's not a lot left out there that still has carburetors on them. Which unfortunately is to my dismay, because I happen to like the simplicity of carburetors. But although I will have to acknowledge, I was talking about that snowmobile earlier, this snowmobile that I'm putting together is an early electronic fuel injected sled. And I am absolutely shocked at how easy it starts. It's like you give it a half a pull and it fires up first time every time. So as much as I hate to admit it, I guess there are some, when the technology works, it's wonderful, but I don't know how much I'm gonna like it when I'm out in, 20 miles from camp and that little electronic module decides to stop working.
You get the tow rope, so.
Yeah.
And an extra can of fuel.
Yeah, and the manual,
The towmobile.
yeah.
Um,
You want your own manual on that one.
that unfortunately it's a problem. I've done that kind of stuff all my life, and I keep things. So when something breaks 10 years later, now I'm scratching my head and say, okay, what did I put in there? What do I need for, what's in it for a distributor, or what's in it for? If I were organized, I would keep a notebook when I built things, but I'm not that organized. Alright, yeah, in here, they're gonna, most outboards, well, they're saying we'll have a single carburetor for each cylinder. It's sorta true on the larger stuff. I mean, this is, for example, this is 2 cylinders with 1 carburetor, so it's not always true. And a lot of times they will have, like OMC used for years, they'll use 2-barrel carburetors, which basically are, it's a carburetor shares 1 float bowl or 1 fuel reservoir, but it'll have 2 venturis or 2 throats that the fuel and air come in, and 1 goes to each cylinder.
So paragraph 15 is important, what you say?
Hmm?
Test paragraph 15.
Just let me see, I get this one.
It's one of the questions on the quiz at the end.
There you go. I'm with you.
Yeah, they're showing on page 64, a 6-cylinder engine with 3 carburetors, so that's.
Well, I think the text says that's half of it.
Hmm?
The text says that's only half of it.
Only 3 carburetors are shown.
Rusty, with engines with multiple carburetors, how do they keep the carbs synchronized, or do they worry about it?
There is a procedure for synchronizing them, and normally it's in adjustment of the linkage that connects them. Generally, there is an adjustment there to make sure they're all working
I
together.
remember in a previous life, I was keeping a rather elderly sports car alive,
Yeah,
4-cylinder with 2 carburetors.
yeah,
And it was, sometimes an interesting process to get the things.
yeah, to sync them all, and yeah, those old British and motorcycles are the same
But
way.
it was, old British.
Old
sports
British cars, and even the Japanese motorcycles that are carbureted, and you basically use I'm trying the name of the flow gauge that basically uses barometric pressure. You're basically checking the very accurately vacuum in each carburetor, and you adjust them.
So that they're both the same. You don't care what it is, as long as they're the same.
And you should all get they should all be similar. Because in fact, I own a motorcycle that has 6 carburetors, and they're supposed to be
6?
Yeah, the Honda Valkyrie. It's a 6-cylinder engine, and it has 6 carburetors. And I have yet to delve into trying to. It runs good. I'm just changing the oil and leaving it alone. You know.
Sounds like a wise move.
Like the rest of us.
But, yeah, as I tell my wife, though, the catch is with 6 carburetors on there, I'm not letting it sit. I ride that thing all year round, at least twice a month. In fact, I had to drop some paperwork off to Joe Kelleher on Sunday, and I took the bike out from his house to my house is like 17 miles, and I don't understand it, but for somehow I managed to put 90 miles on the bike going to his house and back.
Was it a nice day? I don't remember.
Yeah, Sunday was nice.
It was a really nice day.
Yeah.
You go the long way. Be a
Yeah, I
kid-
never
be a
quite
kid.
realized that Woonsocket, Rhode Island is between Walpole and Mansfield.
Right.
Somehow it appeared to be.
It can be.
That is the long way.
You must have got lost.
Right. You have no place to put your GPS on that bike.
Mhm.
No place to put the GPS on the bike.
No, yeah, actually there is. I have a phone, I've got a phone holder that on the handlebars.
Must be aftermarket.
Oh, yeah, that's my son and I sometimes will go out on a Sunday morning, we'll get on our bikes and we'll just go explore. No idea where we're going, and at some point I'll be like, okay, we gotta think about heading home, then I'll pull out the GPS and we'll figure out how to get home.
Touch home and things.
And sometimes we're 10 minutes from home, sometimes we're 3 hours from home, you know?
Main water.
Alright, I'm assuming by now everybody's aware that, two-stroke outboards, the lubricating oil is added to the fuel. On most remotely modern outboards, they're injected, so it's done automatically. You know, it's not like the old days, we used to have to mix 6-gallon cans of fuel and oil.
So the modern two-strokes would have an oil reservoir and then?
Yeah, they generally have an oil reservoir and there's an injection pump that mixes, that adds it to the fuel as it's going into the engine.
Sounds like it's cheating.
But, well, when I was growing up, the marina near us actually used to have a pump that was 50-to-1 mix. They'd
Yeah.
pre-mix it in their tanks.
Yeah.
I can never keep track of the two-stroke things we have, what uses 40, what uses 50, it's like it's a crapshoot.
Yeah, I just mix up a tank of, well, I have older stuff, but I mix up a tank of like 25-to-1 and I just run everything on that. And, yeah, they do, some of them smoke a little,
Yeah.
but like you, I can't keep track of, everything's a little different.
Yeah, I buy one or the other and just
Although I've gotten a habit now, when I'm
haven't
in
killed
Maine,
anything yet.
when I'm in Maine, I fill 2 5-gallon cans with non-ethanol fuel,
Mhm.
which you can't buy in Mass.
Mhm.
And I
Why
use
is
it-
that, by the way?
I'm sure somebody up at the State House has decided this.
Oh, do you think there's a bureaucrat?
I have a feeling it's a regulation, because although there's so many people, you can't buy it at like a gas station. If you have an airport near you, you can, because airports sell non-ethanol. But I know up in Maine, probably 50% of the gas stations have a non-ethanol pump. And so I do that with all of my two-stroke stuff, I run the non-ethanol.
So it's a
And-
lot cheaper than buying that engineered stuff that you buy,
Yeah,
in gallon cans.
non-ethanol's 50 cents more than regular gas.
Is it the same as that True Fuel in the gallon can?
Well, the True Fuel is pre-mixed with oil versus
Right, so
I'm just
not
buying.
that, but there's like, at Home Depot, you can buy a can of
It's like $20 a
$20
gallon.
a gallon,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, or you can go up to Maine and
Right,
for
it's the same stuff.
$3.89 a gallon, you can buy non-ethanol fuel.
But is that all that's in that can is non-ethanol?
If you're
fuel?
getting the 4-stroke,
Yeah.
I don't know if they have other additives in there, but that's why I buy it in 2 6-gallon jugs. And what I do, I don't have an issue with the ethanol fuel during the season when I'm using stuff, but at the end of the season, I'll try to run the last tank of fuel, whether it's my string trimmer or lawnmower or anything that's gonna sit. I'll run the last tank, I'll run the non-ethanol. Because one of the problems with the ethanol is it does tend to attract moisture when they sit. Alright, and talking about a 4-stroke outboard, again, we talked about this earlier, but the 4-stroke outboards are generally a dry sump oil system, meaning that the crankcase is not serving as an oil reservoir.
That's
You know,
because
it
it's
kinda
vertically-
can't, cause it's
vertical.
turned sideways. So like we talked, they have a scavenge pump at the bottom that pulls the oil into a separate tank. And that's true even the small, I know I helped a buddy of mine do an oil change on a 10 or 12 horse little Honda four-stroke outboard. And even that had a little, separate little oil tank.
On question 13, what's the difference between B and D?
Hmm?
What page you on?
Question 13.
Question 13? On what?
A
For chapter
separate
7?
oil reservoir versus a simple oil pan reservoir.
Simple
Yeah,
oil
that's
pans in the
exactly what I'm
bottom.
talking about. A simple oil pan reservoir means the bottom of the engine
Yeah,
is your oil reservoir.
yeah.
An oil tank is a separate tank or separate bottle that's not part of the engine.
Okay.
Because if you've got an engine running horizontally, you can use the bottom of the engine as your oil reservoir. But if you're standing the engine on end, what's gonna happen to all that oil when you shut the engine off? It's all gonna fill up the bottom cylinders. So they really can't have oil remain in the engine. So therefore, like I said, they'll use a small pump to pump as the oil comes off of the bearings and camshafts and everything. It'll pool in the bottom, and there's a pump that will, just like the bilge pump in your boat, which will pump that out into a storage tank. And then the oil pump of the engine will take oil from that tank. And that it's referred to as a dry sump oil system. Okay, is that? Does that answer your question? Alright, well, I guess we'll move on to ignition systems, outboard ignition systems. There are basically three systems commonly used: magneto ignition, distributor breaker point ignition, which I showed you on the 4 strokes, and solid state ignition. Solid state ignition basically replaces the breaker points with an electronic module, just to put it in very simple terms. This is a magneto ignition, which also uses breaker points. And basically, when this is all installed on the motor, the flywheel rotates around this ignition coil, which is what the magnetic field generates the energy for the spark.
What is that from?
That's all from this 4-horse Johnson outboard. This all goes, it was all assembled. That would go on there.
Huh.
And this flywheel would sit on top. Like that. So it was and this is an old one. So this was your actual throttle control. It was one of the old ones that had the slide on the front. I mean, these were very simple. I should have. Went with this. There it is.
By the last class, we're gonna have the entire number.
It's looking like it.
Yeah,
On the
well,
tape.
I'm gonna kind of show you how this stuff all interacts. Whoops.
You make it look so easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to take apart.
Huh?
I said it's easy to take apart.
Sometimes, if you can get to it.
My biggest fear is breaking a bolt,
Oh, yeah.
especially like on an
Yeah.
exhaust elbow or something.
Yeah,
I wanna
that's-
replace my exhaust elbow in my generator. I'm just afraid to take the old one off, cause I think I'm gonna bust the bolt.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, one of the greatest tools that has come out, well, it's not that new, but in the last 10 or 12 years, is induction heaters,
Mm-hmm.
which I use constantly now.
How does that work?
There's a couple of them out there.
It heats up the
It basically,
bolt?
yeah, you take, the heater has, this,
I love to buy new tools.
Oh, I love an excuse for that too.
Oh, yeah. Tell me where I can get one of these.
I think I got mine from Amazon or something, but, I can't think of, Bolt Buster is one brand name, but basically what it is, it's a tube about that long, and you have, they're like fairly heavy copper wires that come out, do like 3 coils and go back in. It's usually the wire's that long, and you take that coil, the coiled end, you put it over the head of the bolt, and then you push the button and hold it, and it puts power through, you can make a 3/8 bolt glow cherry red with this thing. And I live by that thing at the shop, because on these modern cars, there's so much plastic. The old days of using torches for everything are numbered, because there's so much
because of
plastic
plastic.
around. You can't heat,
Oh, geez, yes.
you can't go to town with the torches like you used to.
No,
And so these induction heaters have become very popular.
so these have to be plugged in the wall.
You plug it, yeah, it's just a 110.
How long does it take to heat up the,
Oh,
Depends.
yeah, it depends
Depends how
how
big it
much
is.
metal's there, but usually, if it's a small bolt, 30 seconds. If
Oh.
it's bigger, it could be a minute or two.
so it heats it up just enough?
And-
How long till it gets cherry red?
Again, it depends on, if you take just a bolt and, like you clamp the end of it in a vise and you're only heating the head and the bolt, it takes 45 seconds to get cherry red.
Jeez.
But if it's screwed into a cast iron engine block the size of a house, that's a big heat
It's
sink,
quite a heat sink.
you may never get it cherry red, but the point is you can heat it and cool it to break that rust.
Yeah.
We use it all the time on like manifold bolts and stuff.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
So I was gonna show you this,
So the heating and cooling cycles break them
yes,
free?
yeah.
Okay.
Do you have active cooling of some sort? Like, do you have like a can of Freon or something to go cool them?
I have a plant sprayer full of water.
That works.
That's usually my, now we'll talk a little further, but I talked briefly
You
about
looking for
ignition timing,
And then
how
I'll buy you one.
as you increase your throttle, your engine RPM, you need to increase the ignition timing to make the spark occur slightly earlier, be due to the delay in the actual combustion event. Well, you'll notice on this, and this is true of most of the outboards, you know, up until the real new stuff, a lot of this is done by the computer now, but traditionally, the timing is advanced literally by spinning the breaker plate that has the points on it. You move the whole thing, it advances it to make a spark happen a little earlier. Now these motors, this is your throttle control, so as you're advancing the spark, down here is opening the throttle on the carburetor. Very simple, hence the reason this thing's probably from the 50s, and this was a running motor when I took it apart. You know, it still worked. It was a tired old running motor, but it still ran. But anyone wants to look at that, just watch out, if you tip it up, this will fall off. That just kind of gives you a little view of how everything's interconnected.
How much?
Getting heavy now.
Yeah, it's starting to get a little heavier.
All that, you know,
This
all
is
the extra
huge, right?
stuff.
They start like under 100 up to like 400.
Divided by 2.
What's that? The,
Bolt buster.
The induction, yeah.
yeah, well, I'm a big believer in the bigger is always better. So,
I think our next purchase is gonna be a cordless polisher
And a bigger hammer.
for the hall.
So is my concern valid if you're taking in so if I'm working off a generator and you wanna replace the exhaust elbow on it, then you should be concerned that you could be breaking that bolt.
yeah. Sometimes, you know, there's a feel for it, you know when, but unfortunately, as I found out many times at work, sometimes it just breaks. A lot of times they're rotted so thin,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing you can do, they're gonna break, you know, you're not gonna get it out without breaking. But the best chance I've found is, like I said, I've had good luck with that. Well, if I've got access without setting anything on fire, I still like torches.
Okay.
I mean, I literally
you
heat that bolt
torch
up
it
until
before-
it's
yeah.
starting to melt.
Okay.
And then I let it sit, I let it cool back to a point where a wrench will fit it again. And give it a try. If it doesn't come loose, I'll heat it again. It's a lot of it, it's not just heat, it's the heating and cooling that breaks that rust bond. And sometimes you have to do them 4 or 5 times. But like in the case of doing exhaust manifolds on a V10 Ford, where you've got, you know, you got 20 exhaust bolts that are they're known for breaking. It's worth heating and cooling each one of them 4 or 5 times versus having to try to drill them out. And
I was gonna ask what you do with the broken one, so you.
you drill them out. But I spent years in a machine shop, and that's what garages would pull the heads off and send them to me to drill all the broken bolts out.
Jeez. Oh,
But I did a lot of that at my shop, and I had a couple of the Ford V8s and V10s, like the 5.4s and 6.8s from like 2000 on were notorious for that. And like I said, I had an excursion with a V10 in it, and of course I started hearing a manifold tick, and I looked, 3 of the bolts were already broken. But it's, you know, like I said, I've done a lot of them, and we still do them. But we don't do them cheap, because at this point, I'm the only shop left in the Needham area I know that'll even touch them. Most of the guys won't even do them. But it's like anything else, though. There are tricks. We've done enough of them now.
This is captured.
One of my favorite tricks, actually, is I'll take the MIG welder with a very fine